Buckingham Palace exploded with a bombshell revelation. King Charles himself stumbled upon a secret that sent shockwaves through the royal household. Prepare yourselves for the astonishing tale of Maid Elena and the moment that rocked the monarchy. Behind Buckingham Palace's gleaming gates and towering walls, a hidden world of secrets thrives. Forget the endless fancy dinners and gold-adorned rooms. Deep inside, an invisible army of staff keeps the palace running. Among them was Elena, a maid unlike any other. Sources whisper she was notoriously quiet, never gossiping, always a shadow. Most maids had playful nicknames, but Elena was simply the quiet one, always minding her own business, barely noticed. Until now. It all began on a chaotic Wednesday, with international diplomats flooding the palace for a royal roundtable with King Charles. Eleanor, assigned to clean a guest parlour, was the last to leave. As she dusted, voices erupted from the hall, a group of men in dark suits, speaking rapidly in a foreign tongue. Palace staff freaked out, realising the royal translator was missing. Panic swelled as a Chinese diplomat struggled to communicate, and other diplomats from Egypt and France only worsened the chaos. The palace staff, trained for trays and windows, were utterly unprepared for this international meltdown. Then, a gasp-inducing moment. Eleanor, still holding a teacup, calmly stepped forward and interpreted the Chinese diplomat's urgent request. The room froze in stunned silence. The diplomat, awestruck, immediately peppered her with questions about the schedule and customs. Eleanor, without a single hesitation, replied in flawless Mandarin, explaining the palace's rules. "Are you shocked?" That was just the beginning. A French diplomat, utterly bewildered, then challenged her in French. Eleanor, without missing a beat, responded in perfect natural French. Even the guards outside strained to see what was happening. The staff were utterly paralysed with shock, mouths agape. The conversation switched seamlessly between languages, and Elena kept up with every word as if it were the most normal thing on earth. Suddenly, King Charles himself appeared, walking by with two advisors. A cacophony of languages wasn't unusual, but then he heard something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Someone speaking fluent, casual Latin. And it wasn't a diplomat. He turned his head and saw her. A maid. In a mild voice, he asked his advisor who this maid, the notoriously quiet Eleanor, was interacting with his esteemed guests. For a split second, Elena's heart plummeted. She thought she was in deep trouble. This was not the attention a maid wanted. She was meant to be invisible. When King Charles finally entered the room, his face unreadable, a hush fell. Every guest bowed. Elena's head remained down, her heart pounding. He walked directly to her. Then, another astonishing move. King Charles, testing her, calmly spoke to her in flawless Greek, asking if she understood. Elena, steady and composed, responded in perfect Greek. A long, stunned silence hung in the air. The king raised an eyebrow, gave a small, approving nod, and then, in front of everyone, declared, "Have her sent to my study now," diplomats whispered. Palace staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one had ever witnessed anything like it. Eleanor stood frozen, unsure if her legs would even move. Mrs. Winthrop, the stern head of staff, swiftly took charge, and within minutes, Eleanor was being led through forbidden parts of the palace towards the king's private study, a place few servants ever saw. Life at Buckingham Palace, she knew, would never be the same. This was just the electrifying start. According to royal insiders, after his meeting, King Charles stormed straight to his private study, a room steeped in history, where Eleanor patiently waited. Charles stood by the window, his shoulders stiff, his mind reeling from what he'd just witnessed. How could a maid, of all people, casually speak flawless Mandarin, Arabic, French, and Russian? It seemed utterly impossible, yet it had happened. When he finally turned to her, Eleanor's face was a mask of tension. Was she about to be praised or fired? King Charles calmly ordered her to sit. Eleanor obeyed, her face calm, her eyes watchful. She knew this wasn't a casual chat. No one was summoned to this room for pleasantries. The tension was palpable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Charles studied her like a perplexing puzzle piece. Then, with authoritative words devoid of warmth, he demanded to know who she was. Without any evasions, clever tricks. Eleanor took a steadying breath and spoke. She was Elena Morkos, daughter of the distinguished linguist, Professor Elias Morkos. According to a royal insider, a flicker of recognition crossed King Charles's face at her father's name. Eleanor, her voice wavering slightly, explained her father was a man of many languages, working with governments and scholars worldwide. She grew up in a home where one language was spoken in the morning, another by evening. It was the only life she'd ever known. King Charles said nothing, his eyes fixed on her, unreadable but intense. He let out a long, careful breath, his expression tightening as if holding back something profound. He walked to his desk, placing a hand on the chair but didn't sit. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached her, he asked where her father was now. Eleanor's reply was utterly tragic, and what she revealed next would leave everyone stunned. Eleanor poured out her horrific story, years of being trafficked, dragged across borders like a shadow no one saw. North Africa, the Middle East, scattered corners of Europe, in every place she survived by mastering languages, customs, and unbreakable rules. Every word, every gesture, a desperate bid for survival. The firelight danced across King Charles's face. For the first time, he looked truly old, his jaw clenched in silent fury. Eleanor continued, revealing how forged papers brought her to this country, how the life of a palace cleaner offered the perfect disguise. No one noticed a maid in a place like this. It was the unspoken rule of royal households. Yet she admitted she hadn't planned to stay. The palace was just another hiding place, but its stillness, its strict routines, oddly resonated with a lost part of her. In a world that had stolen everything, this was a place where days made sense. When she finished, the room was steeped in silence, her story's weight suffocating the air. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, King Charles did something utterly unexpected. He gave a thin, humorless smile. It wasn't warmth, but a bitter acknowledgement from a man who finally grasped a long-ignored truth. People like him rarely noticed the quiet figures around them, the maids, the drivers, the nameless faces behind the curtains. But perhaps they should. He offered no gushing sympathy, that wasn't the palace's way. Instead, in a low, measured voice, he acknowledged her extraordinary story. But within these walls, stories didn't matter as much as how she had made it this far, into his palace, into his world, without anyone noticing. Either his staff had catastrophically failed him, or this woman was a master of vanishing in plain sight. Likely both. Their conversation shifted back to languages. Charles demanded proof. Eleanor didn't flinch. Softly she corrected him. Not 9 languages, 11. And before anyone could catch their breath, she began, naming each one, her voice a flawless native cadence. Mandarin, Arabic, Greek, Russian, French, Italian, Persian, German, Portuguese, Spanish, and a touch of Turkish. The room held its breath. Charles remained stone-faced, but the air in the room subtly shifted, that undeniable feeling in your gut before anyone speaks. It was unspoken, but palpable. Reluctant respect. Right then, King Charles made a swift, absolute decision. No more scrubbing floors, no more cleaning rooms. She was to be reassigned immediately, placed under his direct authority. The job didn't exist yet, but it would by tomorrow. Linguistic advisor, he'd call it. Let anyone dare question it. Shortly after, King Charles called Elena back, along with his royal advisor, and laid out the astounding plan. He ordered the advisor to handle the paperwork first thing in the morning. Eleanor, her voice trembling with sheer joy, thanked the king. But what he said next silenced everyone cold. In a calm, steady voice, Charles looked at her and declared, "This isn't kindness. It's a necessity. This palace has one interpreter, and he's nowhere to be found." The room fell silent again. No one argued. No one dared. Eleanor left the study, the heavy doors closing behind her. But that wasn't the end. Remember Prince William's vision for a streamlined royal family? When King Charles eventually passes on, what will Elena's place be? And will the other officials at Buckingham Palace ever accept the King's decision? We'll unravel that in the next chapter, so don't go anywhere. Now this is where it gets absolutely wild. The news of King Charles appointing a maid as his personal linguistic advisor ripped through the palace like wildfire. No cameras, no grand announcement. It was quietly slipped into the day's official notices with a short, sharp letter to staff. Effective immediately, Eleanor is appointed as His Majesty's personal linguistic advisor. Just one line, but it struck the palace like a thunderclap. The old guard erupted in fury. They couldn't openly protest, not with Charles still on the throne, but palace workers confirm most were absolutely enraged. The message was crystal clear. This was an insult, a disgrace. Never in Buckingham Palace's rigid history had a servant been elevated so high. Tradition had been viciously slapped, and the old guard wouldn't tolerate it. But it didn't stop there. The whispers spread to the senior advisors, the real power behind the throne. These were men and women who had clawed their way up the royal ladder, graduated from Oxford, advised generations of royals, and now, overnight, they were outranked by a maid. To them, Eleanor's appointment wasn't just an odd decision, it was a direct challenge to their entire lives. During one heated panel meeting with the king, a senior advisor finally snapped. In a tight, formal voice, he called the king's decision reckless, warning it set a dangerous precedent that could unravel centuries of tradition. All eyes in the tense room fixed on Charles, and true to form, the king didn't raise his voice or argue. He listened, nodded once, and calmly replied with a single word. Noted. That was it. No speeches, no debate. Decision final. And that quiet dismissal, that unshakable authority, infuriated them even more. Downstairs in the palace kitchens and staff quarters, the gossip was relentless. Eleanor had once scrubbed those very floors, peeled those same potatoes. Now she walked beside the king. Her old colleagues were torn between pride, searing jealousy, and utter shock. Behind closed doors, whispers ran rampant. She must have done something illicit to win the king's favour. Amid the uproar, a few quietly admired her. The junior staff, the immigrants, the overlooked workers in forgotten palace corners. They saw Eleanor as a beacon. If she could rise, maybe one day someone like them could too. But even they dared not show it. Going against tradition in Buckingham Palace was a perilous game. Reports confirm Elena felt the shift immediately. People she once shared laughs with now avoided her. Conversations died the moment she entered a room. Orders came with stiff, cold formality. For the former maid, life was irrevocably changed. She wasn't Elena anymore. She was Miss Elena. The king's favour meant no one openly challenged her. But the glacial stares, the silence, the isolation, they screamed everything. If you thought the opposition was over, what you're about to witness will leave you aghast. A few days later, during a diplomatic briefing, a senior advisor made a sharp, pointed jab at Eleanor. Charles looked up from his papers and coolly retorted, "Some decisions are made precisely because they cannot wait." The room went silent. Behind the scenes, high-ranking officials began viciously murmuring about the king's judgment. Was he losing it? Was Eleanor's sudden prominence a sign of poor leadership? Some even sent quiet messages to Clarence House, where Prince William was watching the situation with intense scrutiny. William's vision for the royal family was smaller, leaner, more modern. He'd proposed cutting unnecessary roles. Now, with his father promoting a maid to influence, those plans faced a new, shocking question. Some insiders believed William wouldn't hesitate to quietly remove her. Others argued he might see her value, especially with her incredible linguistic skills. After all, someone who could switch between Mandarin, Arabic, French, Russian, and ancient Greek wasn't found every day. But for now, no one knew for sure. As for Charles, he didn't back down. In private meetings, he continued to consult Elena, seeking her input during delicate conversations with foreign delegates. He valued her perspective, her understanding of nuance, and the fact that she had lived a life most in that palace couldn't even imagine. To him, she was invaluable. And while the backlash inside Buckingham Palace was fierce, outside the palace gates the public was starting to notice. Some hailed it as a bold, modern step, others called it reckless. Newspapers screamed headlines like "King's Maid turned advisor" or "Royal Mess." Radio shows debated tradition's place in today's world. The pressure was mounting dangerously. Yet, amid all the venomous gossip, the cold glares, and the crushing doubts, Eleanor stood firm. She didn't seek attention, nor did she cower. She walked the palace halls with quiet dignity, knowing every step was watched by those hoping to see her fail and those secretly rooting for her to endure. In the end, Charles addressed the palace in his usual understated way. No grand speech, no public declarations, just a brief private message to his staff. Tradition isn't about standing still. It's about carrying forward what matters and leaving behind what doesn't. Loyalty, wisdom, and courage can be found in the unlikeliest of places. And in this palace, those who earn trust will keep it. The message was chillingly clear. Eleanor is here to stay, at least for now.